today's topic, last time we had our panel discussion, we talked about racism in education, you gutsy bunch, you. So I thought it was a natural progression to move that conversation to looking at how we as educators, teachers, leaders in tertiary education and lifelong learning, how do we respond effectively to the diverse cultural foundations, language and experiences of learners in our broader community? How do you do this in your practice, whether you're teaching or you're in charge of providing learning services? So that's our topic for today, is to have a conversation about that. In the Cook Islands, we use a word called uipaanga, which is about having a conversation freely about these things. So who would like to kick it off? How do you do that?
Hey, I'll jump in the deep end.
Get in there, Ricky.
I guess for me, I think of two values from Te Ao Māori, and I think this is where it all starts. So you've got to build a really strong foundation of manaakitanga, and also whakawhanaungatanga. So for me, those are the two key values. And you know, manaaki is beautiful, that reciprocal caring. And in a learning context, we often hear about things like, oh yeah, I have a kai with my students, or you know, I use kia ora when I start my lesson. But you know, when you push a bit deeper than that, it's about, you know, the manaaki in a learning context becomes about your students or who you're working with being able to bring them their whole selves into the classroom. So you know, if you're teaching with a strong foundation of manaaki and you know them, they've been able to bring their whole selves into the learning, and you sustain them as people, as culturally located people. So all of their culture, you know, and all of the diversity of their culture is welcomed first and foremost. Yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ricky. So, Ricky, in your role with UCOL, you're responsible for looking after Māori and Pasifika learners, is that correct?
Yeah, well,
everybody.
Everybody, yeah. So we're committed to what we call Te Atakura values, which were we created those from early research and the work that Russell Bishop and Miri Berriman, etc., done with the Te Kotahitanga program. So in short, we're like a mokopuna of that program. But what we did is took it to a tertiary context and also to a UCOL specific context, and developed these values contextualized to UCOL, with the theory being, you know, that what works in our beautiful Māori world works for everyone. So everyone, if they start teaching and working within these values, is able to bring themselves. So primarily myself, I work with embedding it through all of the campus, but you know, the main amount of mahi I do is with teachers. So coaching them to look critically at their teaching and learning, and keep reflecting and pushing forwards, and sort of challenging their own pedagogy, and you know, surfacing their biases and really rejecting them. But I have a small team of two, and my other half works specifically with students. So all students, but again, she brings her very, very Māori perspective to the support that she gives to these students. Yeah.
Can I jump into Ricky's waka just for a sec?
Yeah,
I love that you spoke about if it works well for Māori, it works for everyone. And it really resonated with me, because I think a few weeks back in another panel discussion, I spoke about my experience in ESOL. So I come from an ESOL, you know, teaching background. And when I came back to New Zealand after years of working overseas, I was working with a number of refugees, new migrants, new immigrants to New Zealand in Wellington, in the community kind of sector. And these are new adults coming into our country, coming into our culture, coming into our language, wanting to learn, the language of the society, which was English, of course. But quite amazingly, after a year of working with these adults and trying to develop their English language skills, most of them wanted more te reo and more te ao Māori. That was the overwhelming feedback. They very much felt comfortable working in, living within, standing on a foundation which was predominantly te ao Māori, and those words that you used, Ricky, came up time and time again. Whanaungatanga, manaaki, they're all things we can all really connect to. We all understand this, and we can see it when we're learning language. We can see it when we're learning about the history of Māori, of our Pasifika whānau who travel the seas, who look after each other, in a society in which every individual is valued and valuable, So I really love that. But I also want to go back to Anna's introduction, and she talked about how can we respond. And when I'm in my work, I always try to rephrase that and say, you know what, it shouldn't be a response. We should be starting this way. So when I'm trying to come up with ideas or plans around how can we be a bit more culturally competent, a little bit more literate, a little bit more, helpful, caring, loving. It's about having a foundation of that, not responding to raru, to challenges. The foundation is important. And if we go back to Ricky's word, manaakitanga, mana-akitanga, mana is intrinsic in te ao Māori. So every one of us has mana within us. We're born with it. And mana-akitanga is about the aki. Aki for me is to support, to encourage, or to uplift. What does that look like in a learning environment? Any learning environment for anyone of any cultural background. It's about uplifting, supporting, and encouraging their mana. And we do that in different ways because the context is always different. But if we can do that really well, I think we're going to not have to respond, because we would have had that foundation from the beginning. Tēnā koe, Ricky.
Aye.
Love it.
Yeah. I'll just jump in here, just following on with what you've talked about already. When we're talking about a response, what sprung to mind for me was I operate in the mentality of creating a civil defence plan. I think about when I was growing up in primary school, we were taught a lot about in the event of a disaster. And I think a lot of the time, Pacific people are seen as problems to be solved. And if I think about that in the sense of languages, it's actually about making sure that people feel secure about their identity journeys. There's a whole resurgence of Pacific people wanting to get in touch with their mother tongue, their heritage languages. There's money that's being poured into all of this. There's online resourcing that's being developed. All of that, though, still comes back to an individual's ability to be able to feel confident and yet vulnerable at the same time about not knowing their mother tongue, and that those of us that do have the language fluency to offer that wraparound aroa for them to know that even if you don't know your reo, that it's okay, you guys are fine, and this is what we can do to help you reach those steps to feel competent and confident within yourself, to be in touch with your ancestors through your reo, however that translates. So definitely recognising the diversity of Pasifika with their staff and the students, and having those conversations so that they know that even though it's kind of a continuum in terms of their language fluency or competency, sometimes we're struggling with our own internal kind of ways of being, and then you've got other people, maybe Pākehā, Papa'a, Pālangi, who think that, they're well-intentioned and well-meaning, but they sometimes impose things that because they're uninformed about what's happening. So there really needs to be on a case-by-case basis on how we can talk to people and make them feel secure about who they are. Because as we know, identity is a social construction. It's constantly changing and forming as we go, and that we just need to be able to feel safe enough to have these conversations with people, whether they know enough about us or not, but it's being clear about being able to articulate our languages, whether it's going to be in English or something else that we do. So yeah, that's just my mentality, a civil defence plan. In the event that Pacific or Māori people turn up on your doorstep, what are you prepared to do in order to respond? Not react, but respond effectively to make them feel at home outside of their home. So yeah, that's just my take on that.
Me taki Aiono. Bruce.
Yeah, kia ora ana. For me, it always starts at the beginning, and I'll leave it there. Sorry. No, so that
Thank
there's a
you. Thank you
term
for joining us.
that was very deep, I know. There's a term called Aka'a, which is a Cook Island term, and it's about positive relationships. So when I was teaching and with adult literacy learners, we spent a lot of time in the start of the course getting to know each other, sharing our cultural capitals and those things, you know, because I feel that if you start there, you get to know each other, you form these things of respect, you get to know different values, and to me that just solidifies starting up a positive learning environment, because I think once you start doing that, then you can have really awesome corridors, you can have awesome learning, but we tend to be restricting it by time and go, oh, okay, we've got to move on to this. But I think if you don't set that foundation, you know, whakawhanaungatanga, all those sort of things, where you share a bit of yourself, and as an educator, you start that journey with everyone. And, you know, for some people, it can be very vulnerable, but those are the things, you know, you let everyone come in their own time to share a bit. And I think as educators, we always must remember it's a privilege to teach, but it's not a privilege to be taught. And we're in a position of power, so we must lead that and do it all together, you know, collaboratively. And that's my 3 cents worth. Thanks.
3 cents. Whoa, lucky you didn't do 5 cents. Thank you, Bruce. Jennifer, be interested in Ako Aotearoa, because you know, Ako Aotearoa is similar to Ace Aotearoa. We're doing a lot in the space of professional development and cultural competency training. And I know this, I use that word specifically, competency, because it's a word that's debated a lot in terms of what each of you are discussing around how do you teach someone to be more culturally aware and inclusive in their practice. And sometimes it's about the language that we're using in tertiary education. So I've heard competency, I've heard sensitivity, and I've also heard the term cultural humility. So I'd be really interested in the Ako Aotearoa experience, Jennifer, how that's been received through your professional development role.
Kia ora, Annalise, thanks. Yeah, and it's good for me to be able to share that, because I'm very proud of what Ako Aotearoa are doing. Having worked with them for a year, I really appreciate and value the opportunities to connect every Monday morning in te reo sessions with our Deputy Chief Executive, our Deputy Director, Joe Torito, and he leads the whole staff in familiarisation, practice, repetition and explanation of concepts in te reo Māori. And I noticed that, you know, slowly by slowly, many of the staff who haven't had opportunities to work in environments or have knowledge of te ao Māori are learning and practicing and making simple steps along the way in their own learning journey. Because I think, as you said, we can't, you know, make people have cultural competency. They have to want to and need to understand why that can be helpful for them in their own lives, understanding their own identity, and certainly working with their students, working with their learners, working with their community. So yeah, I love that. Joe is very strong on his waiata, and so through a lot of waiata we learn a lot of te ao Māori as well. But as well, he encourages us to step outside our own levels of ability in our own way, our own journey, and practice together in front of each other, and yet in our own, you know, sort of spaces around the country. So yeah, that's, I think, one of the most special features of Ako Aotearoa and enabling us all to connect and to learn together and to hopefully lift, and it feels like it is lifting our cultural competency.
Kia ora, thank you, Jennifer. Ricky, do you want to talk a bit more about the work that you do? Specifically, you said that you're working with the educators. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that? In terms of the, you know, how do
process.
and how do you help them learn more about how they can be more culturally diverse in their teaching practice?
Absolutely.
And like you said something about, you know, it's even about letting things go or getting rid of things. Maybe elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah. So part of what we do is this thing, you know, the fancy edge speak is agentic positioning. So we're really we're really dedicated to everyone, not just our educators, but our teachers specifically as well, to surface and reject some of their deficit theorizing about things. So, you know, the baseline is we're getting teachers to the point that they believe that all of their students can achieve whatever it is they need to achieve, but most importantly, that they themselves, the teacher, have the ability to support the teachers to do that. So what you see happening is when a teacher's blaming everything outside of themselves that they can't control, whether it's, you know, the student's home life or whatever it is, they're rendering themselves powerless. Like, there's nothing I can do about it because of this. So first and foremost, we start with working with them around, you know, kind of rejecting that and switching their focus onto themselves and what they actually do have the power to change. So that's an interesting process. But everything we do is data focused. So we'll sit down and have a pre-observation meeting where we look specifically at the data of their cohort. So you know, traditionally achievement in the program that they're delivering in, the makeup of their students, what their current teaching goals are, where they want to get to, all that kind of stuff. And then we go in and do an observation. So during the observation, I collect 3 sets of data. So the first set of data is around what we call the whānau-like context. So that's our Atakura dimensions. So in 10 minutes, how much of our 6 dimensions do I capture in that family-like context? The next 20 minutes is around, again, edgy speak, the discursive interaction. So the teaching and learning, what ways are they transferring the knowledge? And the theory being that if they've got about a 50% family-like context and 50% discursive interactions, then those 2 things are enabling really awesome pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy. The last set of data is the most important, is the student voice. So I might speak to the whole class, or I might just speak to 3 students, and the questions are all framed around their engagement. So the theory being that if they are really well engaged, then, you know, good things are happening in the class. So, you know, I go off and create a bit of a case study from the 3 sets of data, and then we meet again and measure and quantify and qualify some of that data collaboratively, and then re-look at the initial goals, re-look at how we're going to push them forwards, align to the values, and and then that's kind of the inquiry cycle or inquiry loop. Yeah. Does that make sense? Not too waffly?
No, it sounds like you've got a solid engine going there at UCOL. And really nice to hear about the use of data and then how that informs, particularly in this context of, you know, reflecting on ourselves as educators, but also looking at the importance of having our tauira represented in the measurements of that analysis too.
Yeah, because for us, the student voice is the driver of all change. So without the student voice, really, you know, we're just looking at opinions. I think it's really important to mention too that, you know, we have a cultural competency framework as well, he ka kanoa, and as you know, tangata tiriti. It's really important that we're all increasing our use of te reo Māori, our understanding of tikanga, our understanding of our roles and commitment to tiriti. But with Atakura, we really encourage our lecturers to not start being tokenistic with their students' culture. So we're wanting them to be culturally responsive and inclusive so that their students' culture is sustained. But we don't want, you know, like we don't want them to, you know, their concentration should be on creating inclusivity, not, you know, tokenizing or wearing the culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, you know, that's what we have, because, you know, cultural competency has been something that's been around for a long time now. And we've seen the results of that approach, because it was something that was imposed on a sector, you know, and the intention was that we would help to build that type of capability. But I think some of us can speak from experiences of being on the receiving end of those culturally trained educators.
And the beautiful outcome with when you are being culturally responsive is that you holistically pick up bits of culture. So when your students are able to bring themselves into the learning and you're all learning from each other, then naturally you're going to learn a Rarotongan karakia or, you know, this other student's mum's favourite recipe, but it's not that you're not being a saviour or tokenistic.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Yeah, it's very aesthetic in terms of how we've seen, as I said, the outcome of that type of training. And someone described cultural competency training as something that was finite. So you had a start and an end date, then you're sweet as, you know, as opposed to looking at the humility around actually stepping into the world of somebody else and truly understanding that, and the power of silence to learn. And that takes a lifetime, as we know. We're still learning from our ancestors, and that continues. Other thoughts on this kōrero? Thank you, Ricky.
I was just going to say, I think it was Dr. Mona Jackson who quoted in relation to being tangata tiriti, and around Treaty of Waitangi being part of our foundation here in Aotearoa as a unified, you know, Aotearoa. I think he said the treaty isn't settled, it is honoured. And for me, it's the same around this kōrero. Nothing's settled, and like you said, Anna, it doesn't have a start and a finish. It's an ongoing, developing journey that moves and changes and has to, you know, every once in a while revolutionise. Things will be revitalised and refreshed, looked at, observed, analysed. And that for me is one of the key things, that when we do go into spaces where we have to recognise as educators that we need to be learning, and you know, lifelong learning happens for all, including the educator. We need to know that it's not something that we go and learn and then it just sits with us forever. You know, it's something that kind of goes like this, and it goes in waves. Sometimes, you know, we forget about it, or we might not need to use it, and then actually right now I need to use it again. Actually, I should be up there, so I'm going to have to go and do a bit more PD. And I really love that around Ace Aotearoa's focus. In the last few years, it's been huge on PD for Te Ao Māori, Te Reo Māori, for all staff, because we've recognised that there is a need, there is a desire, but there's also a hunger. You know, we're in a time where there are more of us who really want to know and do more. And that's really exciting. So it's wonderful hearing, Ricky, what UCOL are doing and what other spaces are doing. I'm really intrigued to hear more from everyone else in our panel. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that around the, you know, used quite a few terms there, Anna. And one of the things that we use at MIT is cultural intelligence. And we've been offering these training packages, and that's more really customized and personalized, tailored to the individuals that come through. So it's offered both externally and with our internal staff. And we use the Cultural Intelligence Framework by Van Dyne, Ang & Co. 2009, in parallel with the Kakala framework, and we have Edmund Fehoko, who helps to use Kava to help facilitate those discussions, so that there's this kind of underpinning that, you know, has the cultural roots with us, as well as making sure that we have a framework in place that is able to be taught, but it's a reflective journey that goes. So it's, even though it's taught in a kind of a linear fashion, but we encourage our participants to keep coming back to us, you know, from time to time to see how that's going. So we operate that in kind of four stages. If you remember Edmund, he spoke at the Ace Hui Whono earlier this year, and you know, made a big impact, I believe, around the use of Kava. And he did his PhD on that as well. And we're looking forward to celebrating his success with that at some point. And so, you know, he and I, we work on these workshops around, you know, metacognitive cultural intelligence, which is, you know, recognizing the gaps in your knowledge. I mean, you know, when Jennifer talked before about, you know, we can't force people to be culturally competent. So what we can do as the supposed experts in the field is lead them to discover, hey, hold up the mirror. Let's have a look. Can you see any gaps in your knowledge? And so we gently point this out to them so that they arrive at themselves. So once they've figured out, actually, I do have gaps in how to be more culturally aware or culturally intelligent. So we move on to cognitive cultural intelligence. Okay, now that I've figured that out, what do I need to do to address the gaps? Then we have motivational. So that's what alluding to from Jennifer's point of view. You know, how do we motivate people to understand, you've got the gaps, this is what I need to do. Am I prepared to do this? Do I want to do this stuff? Is it more than just a tick box exercise? Is it because my boss told me I have to be more culturally aware of my Māori and Pacific students? And then it's about the behavior. So the behavioral change has to kick into play, has to be fed into the implementation of all of our strategic documents. And one thing that I'm really proud of with MIT at the moment is that we have instituted, as part of our Teaching Excellence Awards, we've actually just went out yesterday, actually, or Tuesday. Yeah, we have a Māori Teaching Excellence Award and we have a Pasifika Teaching Excellence Award. So what we're trying to do is we recognise staff who have made a direct impact through their praxis, through the student success of our tauira and our Pasifika students, and so that they can recognise, well, you're actually recognising my worth as a lecturer, as an academic staff member, by, you know, having these types of awards that show. So it's not just we're at the bottom of the hill trying to push the stats up. No, it's about what are you actually doing well that equates to the wellness, our academic wellness, rather than just academic excellence. But, you know, it's creating mindsets of our students that, hey, I want to be a lifelong learner. I want to go and do things. So it's all about intergenerational learning, intergenerational wealth in terms of the educational value. And another thing very quickly is that we have student council reps that sit on our academic committee, and part of the things that we're working on at the moment is to really incorporate student voice by having academic student leads. You know, we're really trying really hard to make sure that there are students who have a voice and have the desire to make an impact, not while just, you know, while they're studying as students, but they're living that as well at the same time, and they feel really empowered that they can have a platform to make the change as well. So exciting times ahead, you know, even with NZIST in play, everyone's kind of still trying to figure out how to be friends in this space. But even though there are challenges, I truly believe, you know, moving away from what Ricky's talked about before of deficit theorizing, you know, perpetual optimism and positivity around we can do this together if we're truly prepared to be vulnerable and do our best by our peoples. So yeah, I'm really passionate about that happening.
Exciting. Thank you, Manu. Manu, how do you, because you're in the heart of Otara, MIT, South Auckland, how do you engage with the communities of these learners?
That's one of the big things that we're looking at the moment. In our Pasifika Development Office, we have Loa Alatini, who is our Pasifika Relations Advisor, and we're just working on a community engagement plan at the moment for the remainder of the year. So for the next 2 months, our focus is actually, because we've got people in our office who are really heavily involved with our community, so we're using and relying on their networks to get into those spaces. So we're actually going straight into our Tongan Methodist churches. This is the plan. I'm manifesting this. I'm telling you guys now, it hasn't happened, but it will happen. This is the perpetual optimism that I'm talking about here. So they will go into our churches, they will talk to our youth leaders, find out the feeder schools that surround our churches. So this is, for me, the missing link, is that you can't just say, let's go to the church. No, it's more than that. It's go to the church with information, with the intel to say to them, what kinds of jobs have you lost due to COVID? How can we respond to that? It's the meeting of the minds. I think there's this danger where we think that our Pacific, where our Māori people are not smart people. They are. They just are not spoken to in a way that we see them as equals. So we need to be able to talk with them and say, tell us what the issues are. Let's see how we can, provide some support, some pathways so that everyone can meet their outcomes. But it has to be a shared consensus around how that happens. So that's what's on the cards for us. So the next 2 months will be focused on our Tongan Methodist community. I belong to a Samoan e Whakasa church, which is a Christian congregational church. So I'm targeting White Sunday coming up. So for the last 2 months of the year, fun times for me, I'll be trying to liaise with all the ministers, and they'll probably be expecting envelopes. That's not going to happen, but we will speak to them about, the importance of lifelong learning. And yeah, we can make them rein in investment in their futures, so you might not get it on Sunday, but you will get it in, future Sundays, in a couple of years' time. Once these kids are, and, their parents who have lost work are able to feel valued in New Zealand society. I mean, MPP has released that economic report. Look at that. But then it's like, okay, so what? What's next? We can't rest on our laurels of how much we have contributed to the economy. We've got to keep pushing. We have to keep moving. So we're always operating in a constant state of urgency rather than emergency.
I hear you. Malo. Bruce.
Like for me, I just need to stick to my sort of baselines, and my baseline is always acknowledging tangata whenua and the history, because I think, wherever we go, if we want to be inclusive in cultural values and cultural matters, we need to actually acknowledge the Indigenous culture first, and also know about the real history, all those sort of things. So that's where I always start at with, and also as a person, an educator, knowing who you are. And like Aiono mentioned, Pasifika, there can be many different things, and we mightn't have the reo, but we have the look, so that's one good thing. And just another thing in terms of what Ricky was mentioning about, educating the tutors. So I was part of that, how to better engage Māori and Pacific learners. So we would go around teaching tutors. And for me, it just seemed like all out of whack when we should be teaching our learners how to engage in a Pākehā system. It just seems we have everything back to front, our education system back to front. It's teacher-centred, not student-centred, all these sort of things. So for me, it's just, starting with a baseline of truth, and then being able to share that with everyone. And I think because we're working with adults, we can't pull the wool over their eyes. We might say something, but our body language says something else. And to be honest, I think a lot of our learners can read our body language. We might be speaking an academic kōrero that goes over that, but they kind of go, yeah, I know what they're talking about. So yeah, those are some of the things that I think about, as an educator, or being an educator, or teaching educators how to be better. And you learn by your mistakes too. And you have to be upfront about that, because once again, once we get in front of a class or a screen or whatever, and we're brown, we're role models. So I think that's that thing we need to respect, that position. And also following that on into learning, is to make learning engaging, fun, emotional, all those sort of things. Okay, that's me.
Me taki, Bruce. Thank you. Jennifer, I want to acknowledge Jennifer for being on our panel. You know, it's not usual that you are a minority in these spaces. And I say that because the last talanoa that we had was about racism in education. And I really commend Jennifer, your presence, but also you're someone that I've known for a long, long time in the education space. And I've never seen you as a white person. So, I mean, I just really wanted to acknowledge that, because I think sometimes when we get caught up in the system of having to culturally train each other, we often forget that we are people as well. And Jennifer has been someone that has been naturally in so many different spaces. And yeah, lucky for Aotearoa that they have you.
Oh,
Because I know even today,
kind.
you know, the apprehension of being in this korero with us. And I always say to you, nah, Jennifer, you've always got value, and well, everybody knows if you don't make the cut, you won't be asked back. But more, I think, for you personally, how you feel in this space in terms of your leadership role.
Yeah, oh, kia ora, Annalise. Thank you for your lovely words. And certainly, yeah, I did wonder if I was the right person for this particular talanoa because of your challenge to us about the fact that perhaps, you know, we only look at Cook Island language and culture in the week. And I thought, well, it'd be lovely to hear from our Pacific advisors, Taylene and Pele, and ask them, but unfortunately, you know, as is the nature of their mahi, they're really busy and can't actually work, you know, can't be here today, but they wanted me to really reinforce the importance of the work that we do with UCOL, particularly through Pathways Aotearoa. They wanted me to highlight that, and I'm certainly happy to share that information with people if they want to find out more, but other than just Googling and finding out about it. But certainly Saline was really key on that. And for me, yeah, it is a journey. I mean, I, you know, have been around a long time, and I had the real joy of working in a prison where Te Reo was spoken more than English in the education area that I worked in. And I was immersed in a lot of te ao Māori that I forget has influenced my educational practice. Well, not forget, but I guess I'm taken aback when I see people that have no knowledge and are starting that journey. And so it is always interesting for me because I listen, you know, to your words, Ricky, about the fact that sometimes it can seem tokenistic. And whilst I do agree with you, I'm also feeling like that. I feel for people that are really scared, and people like myself, as in white people who are really scared about speaking to Reo in public and won't do it because they want, you know, want to get it right. They don't want to offend, and the same with any Pacific cultural experiences too. They're not quite sure what to do, what to say. And so I guess I am always torn because, yes, on the one hand, I totally agree. It can seem very tokenistic to just be trying to add in language into our conversation or activities. But at the same time, I think, no, it's a starting point for them, and who am I to really judge where they're at in this journey. And so that for me is key, particularly in this role of Aotearoa Professional Learning and Development, is to try and walk alongside and kind of gently steer people in some directions. And I've been delighted that people have picked up some of those directions, like Pathways Aotearoa, like some of the other programs that we have online or face-to-face. And we have a series at the moment of online Māori cultural capability taken by Mai Winitanga primarily, and we're getting a lot of uptake. It was, you know, surprising how many are wanting to do this at this time, and they enjoy it because it's a short session and some follow-up. But it just reminds me that, of course, everyone's at a different space or different place on that journey to their own learning. So in case people haven't seen those, I just wanted to share those two pathways there, or those two places to start some learning or continue some learning in your own space, and certainly get in touch if you'd like any support with accessing those too. And they are free, I can just add in there as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. All right, we're coming to the end of our panel kōrero. Just wanted to see if the panel had any concluding thoughts to put out there. So again, we started this with the topic of, you know, responding effectively to diverse cultural foundations, including language and cultural experiences of our learners and communities. So, and we've heard a lot of very practical examples, but also provoking our critical thinking and our own paradigms where we sit as individuals, but also how that helps inform how we work with our learners. And what was the term you used, Aiono? Perpetual optimism. Okay. And I've been using a term moimoia a lot in the last couple of weeks because, you know, when you close your eyes and you try to imagine and you have that direct line of sight to, you know, to our ancestors, to our higher beings, you try to, it's often that space of darkness that I think has been conditioned as a bad place. But we're taught, well, in our Cook Islands world, we're taught that actually in the darkness is where you get the richness, that that privileged space to be in the darkness, te pō. And so I often try to go into that state and think, what is my moimoia for myself in education? What is the moimoia for our learners? And often it's when we're in a state of darkness that we allow ourselves to become open and vulnerable to seeing other worlds as well. You know, it's that direct line to heaven. So yeah, that's my concluding thought, but I thought I'd throw it out there and see what our panel wanted to leave is. Throw some wisdom down for our viewers out there.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. Me and Ricky were going, yes, yes. You know, because in Te Ao Māori it's the same, te pō ki te ao, it's the beginning of everything, was this big boom of light. And I always liken it to, you know, that moment of, oh yeah, got it, something's happened. And it is very commonly when we are shutting down and we're in a bit of a rahui, you know, in a bit of a lockdown in ourselves. And for Māori, it typically happens, or it was traditionally at this time, matariki, the beginning of something new, something, you know, that we look forward to. And we don't forget those who've gone. They come with us, and what can we bring that is going to help us forward? So that was really enlightening, tēnā koe. My lasting thoughts was just going back to what Bruce was saying. If we really can, as a peoples, as a unified peoples of Aotearoa, honour tangata whenua and the foundation, papa, which is underneath us, that has been, you know, sculpted and molded over time. For me, I think I said it in our last panel discussion around racism. For me, it's about not trying things that aren't new, and instead trying things that worked. That worked once upon a time for everyone. You know, I've spent years living overseas, and there was this one time I was living in Italy, and there was this huge, big new research out in Italy at the time. This was just a few years back, and it was talking about the benefits of walking into a learning environment with no shoes on, taking your shoes off. It was all, you know, this new, and I was sitting there going, that's not new. That's not new, and that's not yours. You know, we've been doing that forever, because we know what it's like to connect to our foundation physically and how that makes us feel when we walk into a learning environment. So yeah, just trying things that worked, and you know, and people are doing it. You look in our ECE and primary spaces, my kids are in a Montessori. You know, there are philosophies out there within the system that we know doesn't work for Māori Pasifika in particular, but within the system, we do have spaces that are working, spaces that do honour whanaungatanga connection, slowing down manaakitanga and all those things. So it's just about, you know, I think we need to look and reflect too, and what a great time to do it. This is the time to do it.
Right, tēnā koe. Ricky, you survived your panel. Any want to drop some wisdom down for us? You've been dropping a lot in the hour.
Ngā mihi nui kia tātou. Look, I'm just so happy to have been part of the wānanga, the Talanoa. You know, Te Ataahia is used to me, so I think in lots of little circles, so I can be a little confusing sometimes. I don't think very linear. And I think a part of my own deficit around the tokenizing that's happened is some of my scarring from when it's happened to me. But just to clarify a little bit, Faaea Jennifer, I think it's beautiful when anyone learns another reo. I mean, I'm an adult speaker of my own reo, so every day that I use it is a scary time for me. But I think it's like Matua Bruce was saying, it's all about intention, and our students are so intuitive that they know when it's well intentioned. And in fact, some of my the lecturers that I work with that are very successful, you know, they've ended up in negotiated things with their students where they spend a significant amount of class time around whatever, it might be a health science class or whatever, but about learning and improving their te reo from their students. So yeah, I love any use of any reo is beautiful, and it is scary. I think someone who I'm really influenced by at the moment is one of my lecturers through Canterbury Uni, Matua Garrett Cooper, and his whole kaupapa is live a life full of mistakes. So, and it connects. I got so excited, Annalise, when you started talking about te pō, because something through working with him that I've realized about myself is that, you know, I used, as a kid growing up with all this Western influence around horrors and the dark and boo, you know, that I was always scared of te pō. But really, I do some of my most reflective work during te pō. And also, I'm not scared, you know, I'm happy to feel my way around in the dark and the unknown. And I think that really connects to living a life full of mistakes as well, which I think as an educator is a beautiful place to come from. Yeah, I think that's me. Kua motu au. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, Ricky. Aiono, should we go to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about, you know, when people talk about Pasifika Language Weeks, it's like, oh, it's only 1 week, you know, and I think part of my thinking is that, well, it's a start, right? So just because it's only within that 1 week time frame throughout the year, it doesn't stop people from having that heartful learning every day for the rest of the year. So it's actually up to the individual. But I guess it's a collective response that we get to celebrate each of these individual languages for that duration of that week on a national scale. And I guess, you know, it's an opportunity for people to reflect, to learn, to immerse yourself in other people's cultures. And I guess, you know, because I love coming up with little phrases, you know, you have to kickstart the heart in order for that to happen. So that's just my final words for today, and all the best for the remainder of Cook Island Language Week, and looking forward to some minus later on this afternoon.
Well, you're in Otara, so you have minus available every day.
Yeah. We have Tan's Kitchen, just putting a plug in there for Tan's Kitchen in Otara.
Oh, yes, that's right. Bruce.
One of the things that I found most rewarding working with a group of different cultures was that they became a whānau, and the different learners sort of, once they gelled together, they got into certain roles. So some would become more the mātua figures, others would be the tainers and things like that. And to me, that's what made teaching so awesome. And this is who was in the group. So a Tongan father who was quite a big man, who had English as a second language, a young Māori who was an expert in kapahaka, but he couldn't read, he could recognise number, Samoan, a youth and an elder woman, a Catholic nun from Sri Lanka, a political refugee from Eastern Europe who was actually physically abused while in prison, a young woman who had thalidomide, a young Muslim woman who we had to find a place for her to pray, and her brothers would bring her to the course. And the last one was a Ugandan who stowed away on a ship. He loved football, could hardly speak English. And on our last day, we went to the beach, and it was a cold day on the beach. He was the only one swimming. He had never swum in the sea and things like that. And at the end, everyone was awhi, crying and all that. For me, that was one of the best learning things I've ever had. And for me as an educator, I learned so much. So I think, we can be culturally inclusive, but there's a lot of mahi at the start. And I think, that's where we're all at, is encompassing all the people that we work with and we can learn from. Kia ora ana. And just as Cook Island Week, we need donuts tomorrow, please. Thank you.
Go see Aiono. Mai taki, Bruce. Jennifer.
Well, thanks. And your words around humility, Annalise, really sort of struck a chord with me today, because I had the opportunity to join some professional development this morning through Kyla Colburn, and she talked a lot about Brené Brown's work. And I have kind of looked a little bit at her leadership ideas, but it was really reinforcing to hear her talk about stories of being vulnerable and being courageous. And I often don't think around that as in education, but of course there's a lot of vulnerability, or what appeals to me is when people show their vulnerability in their teaching and in their learning, and I realise that that's actually a strength, that people do that I enjoy, and it's something to be thinking about for other educators and for my own practice too. But as well, it's about that courage that each of us uses every day to act, if we like, as educators, to act that, we know where we're going and we're acting that we know what we're doing, and it's kind of courage around acting away from the other things that are influencing our life at times. So humility, and really connected to those words. And the last thing I just want to share was she talked about the concept of listening with the same passion with which we want to be heard. And again, I'm just always reminded about that strength of listening, but I really liked the way it was connected to listen with passion, the same way we want to be heard. So, kia ora ana.
Oh, man, yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to all our panelists for being vulnerable again in this space, and for sharing your wisdom, your experiences of how you're working in this space around building not just cultural foundations of others, but our own cultural foundations, and really starting to see that more visible and be normalized in te ao Aotearoa, and really seeing a shift. So thank you. Mai taki maata. Enjoy the rest of Cook Island Language Week wherever you are, and we will see you online. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Airera.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.